A racist police officer assumes that a black man in the park is a criminal and arrests him for no reason. Afterwards, the officer realizes that he has just arrested an FBI agent. Marcus Davis sat on a weathered bench in Riverside Park, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the lush greenery. He turned a page in his book, momentarily losing himself in the quiet rustle of leaves and distant laughter of children playing across the park. Officer Brian Hawkins patrolled the area, his sharp eyes scanning the surroundings. He had walked this beat for over 2 decades. When he noticed Marcus sitting alone on the bench, something in his gut stirred a feeling he had learned to trust over the years. A black man sitting alone, too calm, too composed. Suspicion prickled at the edges of his thoughts. Never seen him around here before, Brian muttered under his breath. There had been reports of a suspect fitting a general description that matched Marcus' vague, flimsy lead, but it was enough for Brian. Marcus felt the weight of someone's gaze and looked up from his book. He noticed Brian standing a distance away, staring at him with a look that was all too familiar. Prejudice masquerading as concern. Brian's grip on his baton tightened. "Let's see what this guy's up to," he muttered as he started walking towards Marcus. Marcus watched Brian approach, keeping his expression neutral. He knew what was coming. "Afternoon," Brian said as he reached the bench, his tone polite but with an edge to it. "Afternoon," Marcus replied, his voice calm and even. He kept his hands visible, resting them on the closed book in his lap. "What brings you out here today?" Brian asked, his eyes scanning Marcus's face. "Just enjoying the park. It's a nice day." Brian nodded slowly, though he wasn't really listening. "You from around here?" Marcus smiled slightly. "I've been around." Then unanswered didn't sit well with Brian. "Mind if I see some ID?" Marcus's smile faded. "Am I under arrest?" he asked, his tone measured. Brian bristled. "You will be if you don't cooperate." His hand moved to rest on his holster. Marcus took a slow breath. "I'm just sitting in a park. Is there a law against that?" "You fit the description of someone we're looking for," Brian said, though even he knew how weak the excuse sounded. He stepped closer, looming over Marcus. "And what description is that?" Marcus asked quietly. Brian's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me. Show me some ID now." For a moment, the two men locked eyes. Marcus decided to comply. Without a word, he reached into his pocket slowly and pulled out his wallet. Brian snatched it from his hand and glanced at it. The name didn't mean anything to him. "Stand up," Brian ordered. Marcus sighed inwardly but did as he was told. Rising slowly from the bench. "Turn around," Brian said, pulling out handcuffs. Marcus felt a surge of frustration but pushed it down. He turned around, letting Brian cuff him without resistance. As Brian tightened the cuffs around Marcus's wrists, he grabbed Marcus's arm and started leading him towards the patrol car. Marcus didn't say a word as they walked, his mind already shifting to what would come next. Despite all his accomplishments, he was still seen as just another black man in the eyes of too many people like Officer Brian Hawkins. The patrol car's engine hummed as Brian drove Marcus toward the precinct. Brian's grip on the steering wheel was tight, his knuckles white. Marcus sat quietly in the back seat, the city streets blurring by. "What were you really doing in that park?" Brian asked, his voice edged with suspicion. "I told you, I was just reading," Marcus replied calmly. Brian scoffed. "A guy like you just sitting around reading. You expect me to believe that?" "A guy like me," Marcus repeated. His tone measured. Brian hesitated, then doubled down. "You don't look like someone who spends his afternoons reading in the park." "And what does someone like me look like, officer?" Marcus asked coolly. Brian didn't answer. He couldn't. The car pulled into the precinct's parking lot. Brian got out first, then opened the back door and helped Marcus out. Inside the precinct, the usual buzz of activity filled the air. Brian led Marcus through the main hall to the booking area. The officer behind the desk, Officer Jenkins, looked up surprised. "What's this about?" "Caught him acting suspicious in the park," Brian replied. He handed over Marcus's ID. Jenkins glanced at the ID, then back at Marcus. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but he quickly masked it. "Captain Bennett's in her office. You'll need to take him to her." Brian stiffened slightly. He hadn't planned on involving Captain Bennett so soon. "All right." Brian knocked on Captain Bennett's door, then opened it. The office was neat, organized. Captain Bennett, a woman in her early 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, looked up from her paperwork. "Officer Hawkins, what's this about?" she asked. "Caught this guy in the park, Captain. He was acting suspicious. Wouldn't cooperate when I asked for ID." Captain Bennett's gaze shifted to Marcus, and for a split second, there was a flicker of recognition. "Is that so?" she said evenly. Marcus met her eyes and saw the recognition there. He knew Captain Bennett was aware of who he was. "That's right," Brian continued. "I brought him in for questioning." Captain Bennett nodded slowly. "I see. And did you have probable cause to arrest him?" Brian hesitated. "He wouldn't cooperate." "Captain Officer Hawkins, why don't you step outside for a moment? I'd like to speak with Mr. Davis alone." Brian blinked, taken aback. "But Captain, outside." "Hawkins," Bennett said firmly. Reluctantly, Brian released Marcus and stepped out of the office. As soon as he was gone, Captain Bennett's demeanor shifted. Mr. Davis, I apologize for this misunderstanding, she said. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. No need to apologize, Captain. You're just doing your job. I'm aware of who you are, but I'd appreciate if we kept that under wraps for now. I need to handle this situation carefully. Of course. I'm not here to cause trouble, Captain. I just want to make sure things are handled properly. They will be. I'll speak with Officer Harkins and deal with this appropriately. But I have to ask, why didn't you just tell him who you are? Marcus's smile faded. Because it shouldn't matter, Captain. My identity shouldn't be the reason he decides to treat me with respect. Captain Bennett considered his words, then nodded. You're right. It shouldn't matter. But unfortunately, it does to some people. The room fell silent for a moment. Finally, Captain Bennett stood up. I'll call Officer Harkins back and we'll resolve this. As Captain Bennett opened the door, Brian stepped back inside, his expression wary. Mr. Davis here is not the man you were looking for. You'll release him immediately. Brian blinked. What? But Captain, immediately, Officer Bennett repeated. Brian hesitated, then finally reached for the keys to unlock Marcus's handcuffs. His hand shook slightly as he did so. As the cuffs clicked open, Marcus rubbed his wrists. Thank you, officer, he said quietly. You're free to go, Brian muttered, stepping back. Marcus nodded and turned to Captain Bennett. I'll be in touch, Captain. There's still a lot to discuss. I look forward to it, Mr. Davis. With that, Marcus walked out of the office, leaving Brian standing there with a sinking feeling in his gut. Brian Harkins sat at his desk in the precinct, unable to concentrate. The unease gnawed at him, deepened by the fact that he still didn't understand what had just happened. Suddenly, Captain Bennett appeared. Officer Harkins, my office now. Brian followed her, each step feeling heavier than the last. Once inside, Captain Bennett closed the door and gestured for him to sit. Officer Harkins, do you have any idea who Marcus Davis is? She asked. Brian shook his head. No, Captain, just some guy in the park. Marcus Davis isn't just some guy in the park. He's a special agent, one of the FBI's top agents. In fact, the words hit Brian like a physical blow. An FBI agent, he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. That's right. And more than that, he's highly respected within the Bureau. His arrest is going to have serious consequences, not just for you but for this entire precinct. Brian's mind raced. I didn't know, Captain. I didn't know who he was. That's the problem, Harkins. It shouldn't have mattered who he was. Your actions were based on assumptions and prejudices, not on any real evidence. You can't arrest someone just because they don't look like they belong in a park. What happens now? Brian asked, his voice low. For now, you're being placed on temporary leave while we investigate this incident. There will be an official review, and depending on the outcome, you could face disciplinary action up to and including termination. Brian's heart sank. I understand, Captain. I know this isn't easy to hear, Harkins, but your actions have consequences. We can't afford to have officers who let their biases dictate their decisions. Brian nodded, though his mind was still reeling. When he left the precinct, the familiar sights and sounds that had once brought him comfort now felt distant, almost alien. Brian Harkins stood in the corridor outside the conference room, his heart pounding. The official review was about to begin. Captain Bennett appeared. We're ready for you, Officer Harkins. Brian followed her into the room. Inside, the long table was lined with stern-faced officials from internal affairs, high-ranking officers, and at the far end, Marcus Davis. Marcus's presence was like a punch to the gut. Brian had hoped he wouldn't be there. Captain Bennett took her seat. Officer Harkins, this review is to determine the appropriateness of your actions during the arrest of Mr. Marcus Davis. Do you understand the gravity of this situation? Yes, Captain, Brian replied. Let's start with the incident report. According to your statement, you arrested Mr. Davis because you believed he was a suspect in recent robberies. Is that correct? Brian nodded. Yes, Captain. I saw him in the park and he matched the description we had. He was acting suspiciously. And what exactly was suspicious about his behavior? Bennett asked. He was alone, just sitting there, and when I asked for his ID, he was evasive. Evasive how? He didn't want to show me his ID right away. He seemed like he was hiding something. Marcus's voice cut through the air. I was reading a book, Officer Harkins. Not exactly the behavior of a criminal on the run. Brian flinched. I was just doing my job, Captain. I was trying to protect the community. And did you find anything on Mr. Davis that would indicate he was involved in any criminal activity? Bennett asked. Brian shook his head. No. He was clean. There was a heavy silence. Then one of the internal affairs officers spoke up. Officer Harkins, did it ever occur to you that Mr. Davis might have been telling the truth? I was following protocol. We're trained to be cautious. But did you consider that your assumptions might have been influenced by factors other than protocol? Brian's throat tightened. I didn't mean to profile him. I was just doing my job. Marcus leaned forward. Your job is to protect and serve, Officer Harkins, not to judge people based on their appearance. Captain Bennett cleared her throat. This review isn't just about what happened that day. It's about the mindset that led to your actions. We need to ensure that every officer in this precinct is upholding the values of fairness and justice. I understand, Captain, Brian said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't mean to. I didn't want to. We all make mistakes, Harkins, but it's how we deal with those mistakes that defines us. You need to think very carefully about the kind of officer you want to be. Marcus stood up. I understand that being a police officer is a difficult job. You're under constant pressure, and sometimes that pressure can lead to bad decisions. But we can't allow those bad decisions to go unchecked. This isn't just about holding Officer Harkins accountable. It's about ensuring that something like this doesn't happen again. Captain Bennett nodded. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Your words are noted. She looked at Brian. Officer Harkins, you'll remain on temporary leave while we continue this review. I suggest you take this time to reflect on what's been said here today. Yes, Captain, he said quietly. As the officials filed out, Brian remained seated. He glanced at Marcus one last time, and for a moment their eyes met. There was no animosity in Marcus's gaze, just a quiet determination. Brian looked away, unable to hold Marcus's gaze any longer. As he walked out of the conference room, the weight of his actions hung over him like a dark cloud. Captain Laura Bennett sat in her office, the final report of the investigation lying closed on her desk. The decision had been made. A soft knock at the door signaled Marcus's arrival. Come in, she called. Marcus entered and took a seat. I assume the investigation is complete. It is, Bennett confirmed. After reviewing all the evidence, it's been decided that Officer Harkins will be terminated from his position. Marcus nodded slowly. I appreciate the thoroughness of the investigation, Captain, but do you believe this decision will lead to real change within the department? I believe it's a step in the right direction. Brian Harkins's actions were unacceptable, and his termination sends a clear message. But I also know that firing one officer isn't enough to address the deeper issues at play. You're right, this is about more than one officer. It's about the culture within the department, the training officers receive, and the biases that can influence their decisions in the field. I agree. We're already working on revising our training programs to include more comprehensive education on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. We're also implementing more rigorous oversight and accountability measures. That's a good start, Marcus said, but it's going to take more than just policy changes. It's about changing the mindset of the officers, helping them understand the impact their actions have on the communities they serve. I know it's going to be a long and difficult process, but it's necessary if we want to rebuild trust. Marcus leaned back in his chair. I've been in law enforcement long enough to know that change doesn't come easy, especially when it involves confronting uncomfortable truths. But I'm willing to work with you, Captain, to help make those changes. I appreciate that, Mr. Davis. Your experience and insight will be invaluable as we move forward, and I want you to know that your voice will be heard. Thank you, Captain. I just want to make sure that this department becomes the best version of itself. That's what the community deserves, and that's what the officers deserve too. The room fell into a comfortable silence. As Marcus stood to leave, Bennett rose as well, extending her hand. Thank you again, Mr. Davis. I look forward to working with you. Marcus shook her hand firmly. Likewise, Captain, let's make sure this is a turning point, not just a momentary reaction. With that, Marcus left the office, leaving Bennett alone with her thoughts. She glanced at the closed investigation report one last time before turning her attention to the future. The decision had been made, but now it was up to her and the department to ensure that it led to real and lasting change. With renewed determination, Bennett reached for her phone and began making the calls that would set the reforms in motion. The morning was overcast as Marcus Davis walked up the steps of the precinct. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but charged with anticipation. The changes Captain Bennett had promised were starting to take shape as Marcus entered. He noticed the subtle shifts a new bulletin board displayed. Information about upcoming workshops on racial bias and de-escalation techniques. Officers moved through the halls with a different energy. Marcus made his way to Captain Bennett's office. Good to see you again, Mr. Davis, she said warmly. Likewise, Captain, I wanted to see how things were progressing. We're making headway. The new training programs are being rolled out, and we're implementing stricter oversight. It's a start, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Change takes time, but it's encouraging to see the steps you're taking. How's the department handling it? There's been some Not everyone is on board, but most of the officers understand that these changes are necessary. As they spoke, the door opened and Brian Harkins stepped inside, dressed in plain clothes, a cardboard box in his hands. He was here to collect his belongings. Captain Brian greeted Bennett stiffly, avoiding eye contact with Marcus. Brian, Bennett replied neutrally. For a moment, the room was silent. Brian finally turned to Marcus. Mr. Davis, I just wanted to say, I didn't mean for things to turn out like this. It's not about what you meant, Officer Harkins. It's about what you did and the impact it had. Intentions don't excuse actions. Brian flinched but nodded. I know, I don't know how to fix this. You can start by acknowledging the problem. We all have biases, but it's how we deal with them that matters. You have the opportunity to learn from this, to become a better person because of it. Brian's shoulders slumped. He turned back to Bennett. I suppose this is it, then. Bennett nodded, her expression softening. It doesn't have to be the end. Brian, You can still choose to grow from this, but that's up to you. I'll think about it, Brian said. Good luck, Captain. And to you as well, Mr. Davis. With that, Brian turned and left the office. Bennett and Marcus watched him go. Do you think he'll be okay? Marcus asked. Bennett sighed. I hope so, but it's out of our hands now. All we can do is focus on the work in front of us. Marcus nodded, and there's plenty of that. After a few moments, Marcus stood, extending his hand to Bennett. Thank you for everything, Captain. I appreciate your commitment to making things right. Thank you, Mr. Davis. Your involvement has been invaluable. We're in this together. With that, Marcus turned and left the office, making his way through the precinct. As he walked down the halls, he could feel the eyes of the officers on him, some curious, some contemplative. As Marcus stepped out into the cool morning air, he took a deep breath, feeling a sense of resolve settle over him. The path ahead would be challenging, but he was ready to continue the fight for justice. This was just the beginning, and he was determined to see it through. With renewed determination, Marcus walked away from the precinct, his mind already turning to the next steps in his work. Change was coming, and he would be there to help guide it every step of the way.